And we're back to FreeCodeCamp, still JavaScript. We are getting closer towards the personal projects, the portfolio projects, but we've got functional programming ahead of us. And there should be another one, intermediate algorithm scripting, I guess. But let's take care of this first. I went over this before and it's a lot to read. I don't want to read it all to you, so you may want to pause the video. But generally, a good idea to do these exercises yourself and then refer if you get stuck to my walkthrough. I'm just going to solve the exercise for you and explain it as good as I can whenever I see a necessity to do so. First up, we just want to call a function called getT. Function is already given, and then whatever it returns, it will be stored in our T for team FCC variable. I will need to pass an argument of 40, just a number of cups. And then we're good here. Let us move on to the next task. Understand functional programming terminology. So once again, read it yourself and then try to solve it. Here's the way I solved it. We've got two variables for the two different T types. And we want to call getT once again. We need 27 cups for green tea and 30 for black tea. So let me paste that here. I change it to 13. But if we look at the function, we've got number of cups and prepare tea. So we need two arguments, and the other ones are given here. Prepare green tea. So now we've got green tea in our array 27 times. And the black tea needs to be pasted right here. And we've got that 13 times in our array as well. We move on to understand the hazards of using imperative code. Here you can see that we can use inbuilt methods, you already know them, but these methods, depending on which we use, they may affect our original array or variables that we're going to use, the arguments that we're passing to functions. In this case, we've used splice on our array, and therefore it omits a couple of elements. For example, let me check right here where it says YouTube. Afterwards we should see Vine, but it directly jumps to Gmail. And this is because we're using splice. Same here, the work mail is missing. So if we look right here, video window, there is the Vine. And it should be part of our end result, but it's not, because splice affects the original array that we're using. And this affects all of the future steps. So if we use splice time and time again, we don't use it on the original array. We use it on the altered, the modified array. To solve this issue, we can just use a slice, and this will bring Vine and also work mail into our array. So slice doesn't really affect the original array instead of splice. And this is something that you always have to keep in mind when you use these methods. Some of them affect the original. Let's move on, and here you can see the explanation for it once again. So splice changes the original array that it is called on. So the second time it is called on, we are not calling it on the original, instead we're calling it on the already modified array. Slice doesn't do that, therefore our code works. Here we have to avoid mutations and side effects using functional programming. So instead of using our global variable, we'll just return this one, and we're good. So this will leave our original, the global variable, unaffected. Let us pass arguments to avoid external dependence in a function. We've got our incrementer function. And now we'll use fixed value in a different way. So we'll add it here as a parameter for the function incrementer, and return is fixed value plus 1. Let's go to refactor global variables out of functions. This time we've got a book list. We've got two functions for adding and removing. The adding uses an array as a parameter, and book name we can keep that. Let us declare new variable, an array, let new array, and we're going to use the push method on this new array, and afterwards we'll have to return it. So this should solve our first function, but obviously we'll have to add the array, and don't forget to use the spread operator. And we'll also have to adjust the remove. So again, add an array as a parameter, declare a new variable, I'll call it new array again. We'll give it the content of our array, so the book list. We need the spread operator, and in the if statement we can adjust it. So we use our new array right here as the condition. So if index of is bigger than 0, which is always the case when a certain book name is found, we're going to use the splice on our new array with the book index replaced by this code line. So our new array.index of book name. We can keep the 1 as we only want to splice this one element, and then we want to return new array. So this should solve it. And let me use console log, and you can see what I actually did here. So here's our original book list. And if we now use our add and our remove functions, let me use add. Our array is the book list, and the book name, let me just say new book. You can see this new book is now pushed at the end of our array, so the book list. Therefore it works, and our remove, it's undefined because there is no new book in it before we've used the add function. But if we use, for example, this, it's going to remove it from the original book list. Use the map method to extract data from an array. The map method is shown on the left hand side in an example. So it's going to give us the user, the names, the users is our object, and we've declared user as a new variable inside of map. And it's going to iterate through the object and then give you the specific values for the name property. So if we print it out, it's John, Amy, and camper cat. In our example, we've got a movie list. And we'll have to, let me check, we'll have to replace this for loop. So I can just delete it. Ratings is going to be our new array. So let me go upwards. It's called watchlist, our global variable, the entire movie object. So I'll use it here, and then I apply the map method to it. We want to find movies. So just like in the example where we try to find the usernames. But this time we want to have the title and the ratings. So we need two of these properties. We can add that with these curly brackets. Don't forget them. For the title, we use movie, square brackets, and then title, but let me check how it's written correctly in our object. So it's this one, I copy paste it. And we also need the rating. So I write rating, movie, square brackets, and rating. It should be the IMDb rating specifically. So I'll copy this one and paste it into the square brackets. And now we've got all of the movie titles and their specific rating printed out here. So this is what you can use mapping for. Now we want to implement a map on prototype. So instead of using it directly, we're going to, you could say, imitate what mapping does. Right here. The way I solved it was simply using a for loop. I give the basic structure, so we've got a counter. We'll have to compare the counter to some length, and we'll have to increment it. We've got a new array already declared, so we use it right here. And mapping pushes certain information to an array. So let's use the push method. We must use our callback, and as a parameter for it, we'll have to use the given property of this object. So in the last element it was movie title or movie rating, and we can use this square brackets of I, so our counter for the index position of it. And then we'll push this to our new array. And for the counter comparison, we'll have to use this .length. So whatever it is, we need to check its length. And then we're good here. Let us move on to the filter method. It looks somewhat similar to mapping, but in this case we are also comparing the value that is stored or connected to a specific property. On the left hand side we've got the user age, but it will only be passed through our filter if it is smaller than 30. So for John it doesn't work, but for Amy and concat it does. Again, we've got our watch list on the right hand side. We want to store our information inside of filtered list. And we use a combination of filter and mapping. So we'll use the watch list right here, then we'll filter it, afterwards we map it. Let me read it carefully. It needs an IMDb rating of greater or equal to 8.0, so we'll use movie as our variable. Then movie.imdb rating. And now we'll compare it. It has to be bigger or equal to 8.0. And then we filtered this entire movie list object so that we only have the movies that have this IMDb rating. And now we'll have to map it. So what do we need? Only title and rating. We've already done something similar before, so we'll use movie and we'll have to use two properties. So we need these regular brackets, then curly brackets, then title, movie, square brackets, and title. It should be with a capital T. And the second property is the IMDb rating. So comma, rating, then movie, square brackets, IMDb rating. And now we've got only the movies and only their title and rating when they have an IMDb rating of bigger than or equal to 8.0. So this is how you can solve this exercise. Implement the filter method on a prototype. So now we're going to do what we've done prior to mapping. We're going to create our own filter. So we'll start with a for loop again. We can already compare it to the length of this .length. But now we have to nest an if statement. So this is new. We didn't use that for our mapping. We'll have to check the boolean, so if it's true or false. For the parameter callback, for this, add a specific index, which is our counter. And then we'll add it, whatever this is. So in the last exercise, it was the IMDb rating, and we'll add it to our new array. We can use push again, and we'll need to push this at index position I. So this is basically what filter does. It just takes the mapping one step further and filters it depending on an if statement, on an if condition. Let's move on to return part of an array using the slice method. The example on the left hand side slices it at index 1 where it says dog, and it ends at index where it says zebra, so only dog and tiger will be part of new array. Let us slice our array with parameters, so we'll need a new array and it has to be returned in the end. Obviously we'll have to declare it, so let me make it let new array. And look at the way splice is written. We've got 3 parameters. So the first one is array.slice. So for us it's the enum, it needs to be sliced and then stored in new array. And it needs to be sliced at the begin slice parameter, so whatever number that is, and the end slice needs to stop it. So right here we've got 1 and 3 for begin and end, and input enum will be what's sliced. I can make it shorter by putting this in one code line. And if I print it out, you will see that we've got dog and tiger with the values that are given. And what, let me just put it right here in code line 10. And there you go, we've got dog and tiger, so it works. We'll move on to remove elements from an array using slice instead of splice. On the left hand side we've got an example, index position 3 of cities should be spliced. So this would be London. And only one element should be spliced, therefore London will be taken out of cities and returned, but if you then print out cities, it doesn't contain London anymore. So this was the problem that we had in the previous exercise, that splice, it modifies the original array. Let us check what we've got here. We're using splice on cities again, but we should use slice instead. Should return a new array with only the first 3 items. So we'll have to start at index 0 and then go to index 3. This would give us Chicago, Delhi and Islamabad in our new array. Let's move on to combine 2 arrays using the concat method or concat method for concatenation. Let's use it on the original and we'll attach our second one, which the parameter is just called attach, so don't forget to return it and you should be good. Add elements to the end of an array using concat instead of push. Alright, and here's basically the same difference that we had between splice and slice can be found here. So push would modify the original, concat doesn't. So let us simply replace it right here and we should already be good. use the reduce method to analyze data. So another method. In example, we've got sum of ages. So we'll use reduce to find the age of our users inside of the object users, and then it's going to sum it up. In this specific case, we would have 34 plus 20 plus 10 would be 64. If you've never used it, again read through this text. I'll just solve the task on the right hand side. We'll need an average rating. And we'll use a combination of filter, map, and reduce. Let's start with our watch list again. We'll store it in average rating. Then we'll use our methods. So it's dot filter, dot map, and dot reduce. Let's first go over the filter. You already know how that works, so we use a movie variable. Let me just copy paste this before I make a typo. And the director needs to be equal to Christopher Nolan, because we only want to find his movies. After that, we'll use our mapping. Again, we can use a movie variable. Be careful here, we've got our ratings as strings, so I'll use number to convert it, and I want to specifically convert the IMDb rating. So movie.imdb rating, and this is going to be converted into a number. And now let's take care of the reduce, which is somewhat of the same as we have used right here in the example. We need a sum of our ratings, and afterwards we'll have to divide it by all of the ratings that we have found. Let me use sum ratings, then rating first to find the sum of our ratings. It should be our sum ratings plus the rating. So we take each rating and then add it to our sum ratings. Then we'll have to divide it. So again, we'll use the watch list. We'll filter it. If it's a movie directed by Christopher Nolan, so it's the same filter that we've used prior, but we'll have to use the length of it, because We want to know how many movies we filtered, so .length. And it already works. We've got 8.675. So the second filter, it finds all of the movies by Christopher Nolan. We've got them in an array, and then the length is checked, and then we already know how many movies there are. This reduced before. It takes all of these movies, finds the rating, and then sums it up. The mapping, it has already given us only the IMDb rating as a number, and before that we filtered all of Nolan's movies yet again. So this is how you can solve this exercise. We'll move on to use higher order functions map, filter or reduce to solve a complex problem. So again, we'll combine a couple of methods here. So what we want here, let me check a test, for example this one. So we want to find the whole numbers that are bigger than 0, and then we want to square them and add the result to a new array. So in our example would be 4, 42 and 6, they would be squared and returned. We need to reduce our array right here in code line 3. We also need map and filter. Well, let us start here. Let me just call it squared integers and num. We want to return it as a number. You can use number.isInteger of num. And it has to be bigger than 0. So we are checking if we have whole numbers. For example, 5.6 would be bigger than 0, but we don't want to square it because it's a decimal. And the second part after the end is obviously bigger than 0, so we only have the positive numbers. If this is the case, so question mark, we'll use our squared integers and then concatenate it with number times number, which is going to square it. So if it finds the 4, it's going to have it as a num. 4 times 4 would be 16, and this would be then added via concatenate to our array. And if it isn't, we'll just add the square integers. But let me check, I have to add these brackets right here so that we have our array return. So what this code does, it goes through the array, finds all of the numbers that we need, and it's going to square it. And if there's a number that isn't found, it's not going to get pushed to our array that is ultimately returned by this function. So instead of using mapping and filtering, I'll just use this, and this should also solve it. So there are always multiple ways to do it. Let us move on to sort an array alphabetically using the sort method. You can use that on numbers, as you can see here on the left hand side, or on letters. Here we have a reverse alphabet, and now we want to have an alphabet so we can use almost the exact same code on the right hand side. But you have to understand why we're using 1 and -1. So this is the position of A and B, the two letters that we're going to compare. If A is equal to B, we'll set it to 0, because it's the same letter, so we don't have to reposition anything. If A is smaller than B, we'll have to make it -1, so that it moves one position in the index up front in our array, and if it isn't, it's going to be a 1. So it's the exact opposite of what we're doing with the reverse in the example on the left. In simple terms, we'll just exchange -1 for 1 and 1 for -1, so that the index positions are reversed, and then we're good here. Return a sorted array without changing the original array. Let us return our array, we'll concatenate it, and use array inside, so the parameter that's used in this function, and then we'll sort it via function AB, and then we'll return for the sort method A minus B, and this should solve it, so it leaves our original, the global array, unaffected, and returns a new array that is then sorted. So if I use console log, you can see that 5, 6, 3, 2, 9 is now sorted. And if I reverse the order B minus A, it would be from biggest to smallest. So this is what we've done here. And we've used these square brackets to have an empty array to put all of this stuff in, so that we have a new array returned instead of the original resorted. Let's go to split a string into an array using the split method. The example for split on the left hand side, first one is for empty white spaces, so hello and world would be split where the white space is. Second one with the D indicates that we're going to split it everywhere where these numbers are. And now we want to split it where there's white space and this minus sign. If we use the D on it, let me show you what happens. We'll split it where the numbers are, and there are no numbers in the original string, so D is not what we need. Instead we could use white space. This would be better, but where the minus is, we wouldn't have created the split, and also where the comma is, we wouldn't have that. To be able to do that, we need to split it everywhere where there's not a letter. So we want to use the uppercase W so that it splits it everywhere where there aren't letters or numbers. And we're good. Let's combine an array into a string using the join method. You could see it as the opposite of split. So we've got hello world and we'll join it with a white space in this example on the left hand side. On the right we want to use may the force be with you. So we have to split it first where we've got the minus signs and then join it with a white space instead. We can directly return it. We've got str given as a parameter. Then we'll split it. Let me directly add console.log so that you can see it as I do it. So I split it just by adding the minus sign. And afterwards we'll join it with a white space. And then we're good. I'll run it. And I've made a mistake somewhere. Let me check it. Let me check the test below. Ah, there it is. It should also work when there is a dot. So not just for the minus, also for dots, commas. Okay, so the way I did it, it works for the example on the right hand side, but not for all tests. So I have to replace the split. Instead of using a minus, we'll just use the W again. And now it also covers the dots and the commas. Let's move on to apply functional programming to convert strings to URL slugs. So now we're doing the inverse. We've got a string and we want to add minus signs in between. And we also want to make them lowercase. So URLs are typically lowercase. So at first, let me use to lowercase on our string. It's called title in this case. You can directly return it and then we'll trim it. If you've never seen trim, let me show you this as I go by adding console.log. I'll first leave it out and we'll add it later, so don't forget it. But we'll start here to lowercase. Therefore we have turned the entire string to lowercase. Now we split it and we'll need to use this as plus to have it split where we've got our words, white space, whatever we may have. And then we'll join it with a minus sign. But you can see it doesn't run. For example, here winter is coming, has more than one white space and is not covered. And this is why I've used trim before. So if I add trim right here, we'll get rid of all of the white space before splitting and joining it. And this is why we've used it. Let's move on to use the every method to check that every element in an array meets the criteria. You could see it as another filter, but this time it just checks it. So it's not going to return the filtered objects. Instead, it's just going to tell you true or false for a given condition. In our case, on the left-hand side, we would have a false case, as there are two elements that are not smaller than 10. On the right-hand side, we need our array, apply the every method to it, and then use a function. Let me just add value. You want to compare the current value here. And see if it's positive, so we have to return value bigger 0. And if this is true for all elements in our array, it would return true. Let me check, I made a mistake somewhere. Obviously I have to return this, so I've forgotten to add return right here in code line 3. Also have a sum method, and this checks if one of the elements in the array meets a certain criteria. So on the left hand side in the example, we want to check if one element is smaller than 10, and there is one, or at least one, which is the 8 in this case. Therefore true would be returned. Let us do something similar on the right hand side. We've got our array again, we want to return it directly. We'll apply the sum method to it. I'll use value again as a parameter to check, and we'll return if value is bigger than 0. So one element is now enough to return true. And in our example, check positive has multiple of these elements, so we would get true in our example here. I believe this is the final one, Introduction to Querying and Partial Application. The reason we have this is simple. Sometimes you don't have all of your arguments ready to get passed as parameters to a single function. So you can, let's say, nest these functions and therefore only pass one argument at a time. And this is then called querying. In the example, we've got x and y on the left hand side, and on the right we need x, y, z. So it's two nested functions. Let us start here, return function y, and inside we have to return the function z. And inside of the z function we return, I believe it was a sum, and we simply want to add them, so x plus y plus z. And now these three arguments don't have to get passed to a function at the same time. And that was it for functional programming. So there's one more section to go. I'll try to finish it up for next week, but I've already looked into it a little bit. It's intermediate algorithm scripting, so it gets a little bit more complex. I'll still try to finish it up, but I can't promise. In any case, I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.